Do you have the names and stuff as well? Danielle Hagel.
Outdoor school.
Outdoor school. I think it's got
Keep coming.
And anyone who we missed.
Everyone else that I missed. So please come on, quiet the room down, find a seat. Our elder, Bruce Weaver, will say a short thing. He's asked to say. And we'll have Chris Hillier introduce Danielle Boissoneau very shortly. Thank you very much.
Just on behalf of the group of us who have been your guests and been part of this evening, we wanted to acknowledge the respect, the organization, and the good feelings that come out of this evening. And I'd like to remind you of a story I heard a few years ago about reconciliation. We'll know it's beginning when we eat together, pray together, and hold each other's babies. So 2 out of 3 tonight is pretty good.
So we're ready for yet another powerful speaker. And it's my privilege again to introduce her. Danielle Boissoneau is an Anishinaabe Kwe of the Old Turtle Clan from the shorelines of the Great Lakes at Garden River. Danielle is a writer, a storyteller, an heirloom seed gatherer, and a committed protector of Anishinaabe lands, waters, cultures, knowledges, and lifeways. She shares with Chandra a passion for recreating and reinvigorating Indigenous food systems. And at ACT dinners in the past, Danielle has spoken powerfully of Anishinaabe-led resistance in the courts and on the ground to federal decisions regarding Enbridge's Line 9 pipeline that continue to threaten lands and peoples. We're really honored to have Danielle join us again to speak, and please join me in welcoming her.
Bonjour, Ganawea, Ashka Megaze, Kwe Indigenous Cause, Kitabenzabi and Donjaba, Get Hamish Kenododem, Anishinaabe Kwe and Dow. I introduced myself in my language as a way of grounding myself in the place that I'm at. My English name is Danielle Boissoneau. My descendants are from Garden River First Nation, which is up by Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And I've been living here in Hamilton, Dish-with-One Spoon territory for about 15 years now. So in my biography, I've started to identify as being from the shorelines of the Great Lakes because I started in Sault Ste. Marie, which is one of the gathering spots of the Anishinaabe people, and now I'm living here, which is not here, but I'm living in Hamilton. And the work that I'm doing there is entirely rooted in my love for my kids. So I was talking with someone earlier about, I was like, oh, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about tonight. And I think it was because I was here another year, and I was in a different mind frame at that time. So, like the gracious introduction said, I had talked a lot about Enbridge and, you know, shut it down, do the things that you need to do to ensure that these pipelines don't cross your territories. And I still believe the same thing, but since then, I could point it to one story that I read. And it was about these people, these Ponca people, which is a nation of indigenous peoples from the United States, somewhere in the States. And the way that they resisted Enbridge was by planting some of their corn in front of the pathway of the pipeline. And this blew my mind, right? Because I'm always like, well, no, you gotta like get out there and like literally shut their shit down, right? But this helped me to see and to think about where I was investing my energy. And as a single mother of 5 children, I have to be very careful about where I'm putting my energy, because I could get burnt out, and then, you know, it's my family who's receiving the short end of the stick. But like my gracious introduction always said, I'm a storyteller. So what I'm going to do tonight is tell you a story about how I got to where I am, and then why some of my ideas haven't changed but have started manifesting differently. So we've heard Chandra talk about the intergenerational effects of residential school. And a lot of Indigenous peoples have connections to parents or grandparents great-grandparents who have attended residential school. So my mom attended Shingwalk Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. So, I was raised to believe, our ways of living aren't good. They, powwows are bad. You shouldn't drum, you shouldn't sing. And this isn't to say anything bad about my mom. It's to say something about the structure that she was raised in. And my conversation today is going to be around structures. So, growing up, I believed this, and it wasn't until I was about 22 years old when I started attending McMaster University and studying political science that I started to understand why there was trauma in my life. And it made me mad. I was so mad. I was just like, I was writing really angry essays, and it was a time for me to think and learn about why things were the way they were. And because I'm a person who strives to understand why all the time, that's what drives me, is understanding and learning about why. So after I started learning, and then I sat with this anger, and then this is when I started to become who I really am. And I'd like to acknowledge as well the Onguhomi people for introducing me to the idea of the good mind. So it's not really my people's teaching, so I'm not going to share about that teaching, but I am going to tell you about the effects of that teaching on my life. So I had this teaching, and I started witnessing the effects of our minds on the work that we're doing and how we engage with each other. So this happened around like 2004, I'd say, and I started learning about this, and then some more trauma came into my life. And then I got distracted, and then I was able to find my way back out again. But it was all because of my kids and the way that I love my kids. But a lot of my analysis was always rooted in or around colonialism. So I'm particularly attracted to these kinds of events like that anti-colonial dinner, right? Decolonizing Thanksgiving, because I see and recognize colonialism as a structure that continues to inhibit my people from living full lives. And, I've got some resentment, and like Rick was saying earlier about grief, when he was sharing, I was thinking, and I was like, maybe I'm mad because I'm still grieving, right? So I've come to recognize that my grief is also the impetus for my action, right? Because I don't want other people to continue to experience grief, and I don't want other people to be experiencing grief firsthand. Like, I want things to change. So in going back to talking about my energy, I started learning more about food. And it happened through a community garden. So I'm an urban Indian. And I find that there's differences between urban Indians and natives that live along the res. Being an urban Indian to me is a lot like being a plant in an urban garden, right? And I don't know if any of you have community garden experience. Yeah? Ooh, yeah, I love community gardens. But what happens at community gardens? Like, right, you plant things, you grow things. Sometimes things get stolen. Sometimes your plant dies because it doesn't have a really good connection to the earth, right? And I find that my existence in the city is a lot like being a plant in an urban garden. So as I'm planting my garden, I decided to start doing this because I was tired of constantly resisting. I didn't want to be in a place where I'm just like basing my entire existence on resistance, right? So I was like, well, I'm going to start planting food. This is going to be easy. So my first year I planted seedlings. So seeds that had already started. And I started learning more, and then as the years grow, so this is about my 4th year growing gardens now, and this year I started planting my entire garden from seed. And when Chandra was sharing about seed songs, I kind of laughed to myself because I would also sing to my seeds, but I would sing songs like Led Zeppelin's Ramble On, or songs that I knew. And so when Chandra shared about, like, it could be any song, I was like, oh, thank God, because I just didn't want to necessarily impart any negativity on my seeds. So in becoming someone who planted seeds, I decided to start caring for seeds. And when I started looking at a seed and the power of seeds, I started to think about what it was like for a seed to grow and what kind of environment do seeds need to be in to grow. And then this is how I started to work towards manifesting my own resistance through growing and through thriving. And not surviving, because surviving is a very baseline reaction to existence in this world, right? I want to be able to thrive, and I want my kids to see me thriving, so then they have an example to look to. The funny thing about growing up with my mom is that as I've started unlearning my colonization, my mom has been coming with me, and my mom has been learning about our connection to the land through our spirituality, and where once she thought something was negative, she now embraces it. And she encourages me. She watches my kids when I do ceremony, and we work together in a way that we are thriving together. And that's exactly what residential schools didn't want us to do. And I see that as a win. So when we talk about like anti-colonialism, right? I think this is fantastic. I love the idea of anti-colonialism. But I love the idea of anti-colonialism for certain people. I think the idea of anti-colonialism is a responsibility that should be held by settlers. So Chandra also talked about the use of the word settler. And I still use that word, but I'm probably going to be thinking about it for a while. But I think that when settlers undertake the responsibility of undoing what their ancestors have done, then we can start to work together again in really good ways. Because again, we're talking about a structure. I think that each and every one of you in here are probably really awesome, right? And you're not directly responsible for colonization. I do think, however, that you have a responsibility to undo what your ancestors have done. And you know, maybe your grandpa wasn't the one making shady deals with natives, but you are upholding a privilege that's based on the structures created by racist colonizers, right? And then when we work together, right, when we're talking about, one of the things that they asked me to come talk about tonight was food justice. So I started working a few years, or it was last year, at this place called the Hamilton Community Food Center. So it's all right. It's a nonprofit organization, you know, but the work that they're doing is, I wouldn't say it's phenomenal. I mean, it's okay. It's all right. It's a good job. I'll say that. So, started talking about food justice, right? And I'm like, how am I going to approach this as a plant in an urban garden, right? And the first thing is always about education. So a lot of people, they don't even know. You know, we'll talk with them about like indigenous peoples, you know, eat meat, eat wild meat, you know, and then some people would be like, but you shouldn't eat meat. And would really villainize us for this practice. And then I would say something to them like, well, let's look at the statistics. If there are 26% of the indigenous population suffers from diabetes, and we only make up 3% of the national population, what does that look like to you? What is that called? That's a food injustice. When we're talking about migrant workers who are invisibilized and ignored for the work that they do and exploited for the work that they do, that's a food injustice. When we talk about people who are living in the city and don't have access to healthy, nutritious, good food, that's a food injustice. And there are all kinds of ways that injustices are happening in our world today. But I don't want to talk about that today. What I want to talk about is how we're going to start achieving justice between us all together. And I do want to thank Chandra and Rick, and I keep bringing them up because I'm really happy that they went first. Because I think if I would have went first, I would have been like, yeah, we still need to burn things down, okay? Like, but Chandra... So, reminding me about my compassion and my patience, right? And being a mother, that comes to me naturally. Also, sometimes it does run out, I have to be honest. But having compassion and patience in this time, I think, is a really difficult skill to have. And the people that do have those skills really need to be, the first word that came to my mind is protected, right? Because there's so many times that, like, I become cynical, you know, maybe realistic, I don't know, cynical, realistic, I think they're interchangeable. Anyway, they reminded me that there is so much to work towards. And when we work towards these things with the same mind, then we can achieve anything. We can put our minds to anything. But being that urban plant in the urban garden, all I see around me is colonization. So my mindset is rooted in how to undo the colonization so that my urban garden becomes an entire field of indigenous foods that help my people to restore their connection to the land. That's what I want. And it's going to take work. So when I get asked to come and speak at these places and to talk about my things, I'm always like, I'm just such an ordinary person. Like, what do I really have to share? And what I have to share is my experience as an Indigenous person in the city. I lived on the reserve for a while, and then I moved away, and I've built relationships with people on the reserve. So I'm able to leave the city sometimes, but that's still not really good enough for me. I just really want to be on the land full time. Understanding that Indigenous peoples get in the city and sometimes can't get out is an injustice. And then what can we do, right? Like, I don't want you guys to, like, go home and be like, whoa, the world's so terrible, she's in an urban garden, she's never going to get out. I think, I'll totally get out. But I think that when we start putting our minds towards a collective resolution, that we can achieve it. We can achieve anything we put our minds to. But we need to be able to let go of the things that are holding us back. For me, it would be my grief. Because my grief, I still carry anger. I have a lot of anger towards structures that stop my people from thriving, right? And then I think that Indigenous peoples like Rick and Chandra, who are able to live this connection and do amazing things like start a school like the Everlasting Tree School, like, this is what I strive towards, you know? But it takes a lot of work. And I just want to remind everyone that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that when we work together, though, things will get done quicker. And then when we build relationships with each other, it's kind of like, it reminds me of a quilt, right? Not the multicultural quilt that Canada talks about, but like a quilt of beautiful, warm, cozy comfort. We're built on trust and respect. And I think that that's what's so special about our place in this time right now. Thinking about our place in time right now, it reminded me that I wanted to talk about being Anishinaabe. And we have this prophecy about 7 fires. So it's basically through time there's been 7 fires that have been lit. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but they say that the 7th fire is when, you know, a lot of people say that it's right now. And I believe that it's right now. What's happening at the 7th fire is people are at a point where they're going to have to make a decision whether they're going to walk down a good road or walk down a road that's going to lead the world and humanity towards further destruction, right? If enough people walk down the right road, we're going to be lighting the 8th fire, which means that we're going to be living in a new time. During the time of the 7th fire, there's going to be a new kind of people that come about. These new kind of people are called Ashkabumadazig. Ashkabumadazig literally translates to new life, or the people that bring new life. And this responsibility of being Ashkabumadazig is one of speaking the truth. And sometimes people don't like to hear the truth because it hurts. But that hurt, and going over that hurt, is one way to ensure that we're going to be working together in good ways and dealing with our grief and understanding our grief. I think another thing that we think about when we're talking about undoing colonization and unlearning the terrible effects of colonization is that we have to have something to relearn. And that's what was so inspiring for me about the story of the Ponca people who had planted corn in front of a pipeline. Because not only were they resisting, but they were growing new life, you know? And then when we do that together, this urban garden has the possibility of becoming an entire field of good food for people. And I think, I'm not sure if this is going to happen in my lifetime or my kids' lifetime, but I like to think that the work that I'm doing is working towards that happening at some point in the future. And I think that if we all keep that in mind, that we're powerful and we have the ability to create change right now And if we recognize that that power lives within inside of us, we can harness it. And we can help each other to grow and thrive. When we don't do it, however, this is when we start to dwell on the conflict, the violence, and the harm that happens to people living in urban gardens, right? Staying with that metaphor. I really hope that everyone tonight has been able to learn something new. I'm really personally grateful to be able to hear from Chandra and Rick. Chandra is one of my heroes because of all the work, all the amazing work that she does. And I'm really honored to have met her tonight because it's rekindled inside of me the recognition of remembering the new life. So not only do Ashka Bamadazig have a responsibility to tell the truth about the old ways, we also have a responsibility to start living in a new way and start doing it by example. So a lot of the time, because we're so angry, you know, everyone has a reason to be angry. But I think that when we start focusing on the reasons that we can build a new life together, then our mindsets can start to change. In terms of pipelines, in terms of destruction, Chandra also mentioned natural law. Another thing about the seventh fire is that there are going to be great earth changes. So maybe it's not up to us